I think. All right, so my name is Sam Defoor, and the topic for my paper was music, faith, emotions, and how it affects us. But to be more applicable, I thought that like just music and how it like relates to faith is more important. So my main question that I wanted to answer would be like, should Christians listen to secular music? Because I think like when it comes to music, a lot of us do listen to it, like including myself, I do as well. But I think a better way to word this question would be how should Christians listen to secular music? Because I think like no matter where you go, whether you walk into a Target or your doctor's office, like you're gonna run into it, and like even if you're making a perfect effort to stay away from it, like I just don't think you can. But it's also like it's an enjoyable thing. Like humans, like they express their creativity like through songs they make, whether they're Christians or not. So that brings me to my first point, which is just like music is an innately good and enjoyable thing. So like who here likes to listen to music, just like by a show of hands? Yeah, like I would say the good majority of you. So I just think, and like that's a good thing. And I think that, as I said before, it expresses human creativity, which reflects God because we're His creation and made in His image. And a lot of the evidence I'll be using today is biblical because I think that if you're not looking at music from a biblical standpoint, like you're not looking at it in the right way because like God gave it to us as a gift. And like music has the ability to stir our emotions in a unique way. Like it brings healing and comfort. And I think that God did that on purpose, obviously. But that brings me to my second thing, just about how music is healthy. So aside from music being objectively enjoyable, there's a ton of health benefits. So like research shows that music is heart healthy. It reduces your heart rate, reduces blood pressure, cortisol, which is the stress hormone, um, and like aside from being objectively enjoyable, like music, if it was a medication, anyone would use it because like even if you don't enjoy it, it's still good for you to listen to. So yeah, these are more than enough reason just to listen to music based on that. My second point would be just kind of how music is divine. I think that dismissing it is just like background noise or white noise is super immature because I think God like placed it on this earth to show His power, to show His creation's creativity. Um, and so music is mentioned over 1,000 times in the Bible. I don't think that's um, just a coincidence. I think that like it was written in there on purpose that many times to show its importance. God makes Himself evident in the complexity of a song or a piece of music. A little piece of research that I found when I was doing my paper was the three holy numbers. So there's 3, 7, and 12. They're commonly found throughout the Bible. And one thing I found when I was doing this was there's 3 notes in a chord, there's 7 notes in the primary scale, and there's 12 notes overall. And I just think that the fact that those numbers like perfectly coincide with music, that's no coincidence, in my opinion. Zephaniah, he speaks to the Israelites, hoping to restore their people when he says, Yahweh, your God, is in your midst, a warrior who saves. He will take great delight in you. He will quiet you with His love, and He will rejoice over you with singing. So that last line was really important to me. It says, God will rejoice over you with singing. So, like, even though He created music as a means that we can serve Him, He still engages with it, which I think shows its importance even more. Like He sings over us, even though it was designed for Him. Some other verses I found when I was doing this. Um, yeah, Psalm 98, shout for joy to the Lord, all the earth, burst into jubilant song with music, make music to the Lord with the harp, and with the harp and the sound of singing. And then Ephesians 5:19 was kind of my main thing that tied in like how music is divine and why it's important. Just speaking to one another with psalms, hymns, and songs from the Spirit, or just spiritual songs, and sing and make music from your heart to the Lord. So it really just centers our mind around the fact that um, that music was made first of all to the Lord and secondarily to each other. I think that, yeah, just dismissing it as just sounds is not a good way to approach it, but like viewing it as something biblical, something that God gave us, is an important aspect to it. So, when you're listening to secular music in particular, my first kind of point that I found was patterns are commentary on the heart. So, I think especially when it comes to secular music, like the messages that we're taking in, a lot of it is um, not subjective, but like it matters what it's doing to you because it is different. for every believer. I think that secular music, when it causes sin in the heart of the specific listener, that's where the line needs to be drawn. But again, that changes between people because the words of a song that might affect me might affect any of you differently. And that's kind of where it comes to conviction. I think that as believers, we're all given a conviction, but the problem lies when you ignore that conviction. That seems to be the issue that I found. But what about explicit songs? So I think for explicit songs, there's obviously some things that, like the lyrics, do not glorify God. Like, like secular culture today, a lot of it is just like money, sex, drugs, women, like all these things. And I don't think that those innately do glorify God. And I think that steering away from those would just like benefit you as a person, and especially your faith. But when it comes to like graphic or like vulgar language, the Bible like talks a lot about it. Like I think books like Song of Solomon, where like it's like super erotic, and like the way that they describe, especially women, is like it's super graphic. Like I was just looking at some things yesterday when I was interviewing a few people, and like the passages are super descriptive, just as like a lot of secular music is, or just like any war scene, like the violence and things you find in the Bible. It's very graphic. One thing that I thought was really cool, Philippians 3:8, Paul, he says this: What is more, I consider everything a loss because of surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage, that I may gain Christ. So especially this word right here, garbage, the way it's translated, garbage or sewer trash is what we find in our translations. But in ancient Greek, the word he uses is skubala, which in like modern slang would be just like the S word. So here I think we see a good example of how Paul uses like a foul word to describe a bad thing that God uses bad. But the thing about secular music is we use these bad words to describe a bad thing that we view as good. So it's like he uses explicit language, but he's doing it in the sense of like condemnation or things like that, versus us lifting up something that's bad by using bad language. And I think another point would be, like, if you are a believer and you're listening to music without creating pockets of worship, I don't think like you're listening to music right. Because like if you enjoy music and you're not taking time out of your day to glorify God, like when you're doing that, I think that that's just like a misuse of your time. But I also think that Christians have the freedom to determine what's good for them. 1 Corinthians 23:10 says, all things are lawful, but not all things are good. All things are lawful, but not all things are helpful. You may say that I'm allowed to do anything, but not everything is good for me. And I think that like when you're listening to music and you're like evaluating the words that you're intaking, I think it's important to determine like what is helpful for me. What is like, am I noticing these patterns in my life that the lyrics that I'm listening to are shaping me? So I think that the power of the Holy Spirit gives us that freedom to determine what's good and like what's shaping us, and I think that's something cool. But my last point would be, like why listen to secular music? So my main point when I was thinking about this was this ties back to the Great Commission, which is just like go out and make disciples and spread my word. And I think that without understanding secular culture, you can't relate to secular culture, and you can't properly spread the gospel without knowing and like being able to relate to that culture. In Acts 17, Paul he quotes Greek poets to the Greeks. They were secular poets, and yet he quotes them to the Greeks by means of like relating with them and building rapport, so that way he could share Jesus. He uses it's secular language, and yet he turns it around and uses it for the glory of God. So I think that's something super important. But I just think that when you're listening to it, like your heart posture is a big deal. And that was kind of my main point. And then just like a closing quote that I added at the end of my paper that I think is really good, just when you're listening to music and just like reflecting on it. I said, so as we continue to enjoy music as God intended, let us do so with discernment, making sure that our hearts and minds are best aligned with God's will. I think that just when listening to music, be cognizant, like keep language that you know doesn't build up, keep language that you know doesn't build you up. just like keep that out of your hearts and minds, because I feel like the Spirit's given us that conviction to know what's shaping us in those bad ways. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Again, yes, you don't have any questions or comments or feedback for Sam?
Sam, have you found any like practical applications? Like, I love your heart and all this, like freedom in Christ, and I can listen to these things, and it's okay, but I don't want that to be on a steady diet because it is great. Like, is it an amount of time every day, or is are there ways that you like practically apply how to listen to secular music without sort of letting that be your only intake?
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think this also ties to like why I chose this topic. Like, music is super important to me, and like my faith is super important to me. So I think that's like combining those two things. Like, I have a lot of worship music just in my everyday life, but I think for like a practical aspect, like there's no time limit that you need to meet. There's no quota every day that you need to listen to Hillsong for 30 minutes, or you're not doing well as a Christian. I think that it's more of like, it really is your heart posture. Like, is the music you're listening to, like, are you like thanking God for that music? Like, are you glorifying God through it? I obviously think that like some songs are easier to worship God to than others. Like, if I'm listening to like Yet Not I, but Through Christ in Me, it's like one of my favorite worship songs. I think it's like perfectly written, and it's just like a beautiful song. But like listening to, I don't know, a song by NLE Choppa, for example, like which song would be easier for you to worship God to? Like any kind of music can glorify God because like God created it, but I think that some songs are easier to worship to. So I think it really is just your heart posture. Like there's no perfect way to answer this question. There's no exact time limit you need to meet, but yeah, I just think it's like are you carving out time in your day to worship God, whether that be to a secular song, but it also doesn't have to be music. Like, you can worship God in so many other ways, like if music isn't your inclination, which is like a problem I found, because like I'm super inclined to music, but people I was talking to, some of them maybe weren't as much. So yeah, it's not all about like time. It's just like your heart posture and how you're spending time with the Lord. So.
Sam, I had a couple things. First of all, good job. I can tell you really thought about this. I really like the idea that patterns are a commentary on the heart. When I hear patterns, I think habits, I think things that are done regularly. So, with what you said about, we use these words like secular, and the other side of that, or the opposite of that, we usually use the term sacred. And I wonder sometimes if that divide is as solid as we like to think it is. I know we've talked a little bit about that already, but in terms of, you use the term pockets, let's see, what did you say, pockets of worship? Write it down somewhere. Where did that go?
Yeah, I just said like creating pockets of worship.
Creating pockets of worship. What do you mean by that? Let me just go ahead and throw that. Like, what? Can you explain that phrase a little bit more?
Yeah. So I think by pockets, I didn't mean to like you need to isolate time. I mean, I do think you need to isolate time for the Lord, like being, like, I don't know what the word is, but like being practical with your faith and like taking initiative, like to do those things. That's important. But I think like by creating pockets of worship, I just mean like if you are a Christian and you love music and you're listening to it regularly, and yeah, like your heart isn't set on the Lord and you're not worshiping Him in some way, I don't think that like you're listening to music in the right way. I don't mean like, oh, I'm going to listen to my favorite, or I'm not going to listen to Hootie and the Blowfish for 30 minutes and then I'm going to listen to a Hillsong song just to create a pocket of worship. But I think it's just about like am I listening to this secular music with like a sinful heart posture where I'm like enjoying these lyrics that maybe don't glorify God? But I think it's really just about like the way that you're, or like where your heart's at. Because a lot of it is, because at first I was like, oh, Christians, are they even allowed to listen to it by the Bible? And I think yes, but it kind of transformed into like, yeah, how should you? But I think the way you should is it's like all about your heart, and there's no objective standpoint that you need to come behind to listen to worship music or secular music. I don't know if that answers your question.
Sort of. So do you think it's possible to listen to a song that or to music that is not explicit, that is not Christian music?
Hmm.
Do you think it's possible to listen to that music worshipfully?
I think so, yeah. I think that, like, even for me, like, I found, like, some of my favorite songs, like, they're so well written, like, in my opinion, and maybe, like, anyone would disagree, like Bush. Bush doesn't really like my music sometimes, and that's okay. But, like, these songs that I think are, like, well written and, like, a really good representation of, like, our culture and, like, what people experience, like, I can lift up that song to the Lord and be like, this is a, like, good thing, and, like, I enjoy this, and you put this on the earth. Um, and like you created this person too, like the artists, even if they're not Christian, they're made in God's image, and I think that, like, yeah, I just think that, like, listening to that, I kind of like lost your question. What was it, like the last part?
Listening to non-Christian.
Oh yeah,
music.
sorry. So yeah, like lifting up those songs like that I think are like so well written and enjoyable. Like I think that thanking the Lord for those things and like hearing the notes like come together to create like a pleasurable sound. I think that's definitely enough to glorify God because like He created it, and I think it's like a beautiful thing. So.
We only have a few minutes, but